Hello, and welcome to Higher Thinking on Higher Ed. I am Sharlyn Carrington of Content Strong Communications. We guide universities, colleges, small businesses through content crisis, lead gen, and digital strategy solutions. Today, I am super excited to continue diving into the trends and the challenges encountered by communications and marketing leaders in higher ed. And I am super honored to welcome Brett Ludwig here to the table today. Brett is the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Lehigh University, where he leads strategy across brand, public affairs, and executive communications. With a background spanning Fortune 20 corporations and higher ed, Brett brings deep expertise in reputation management, institutional storytelling, and navigating complex stakeholder landscapes. Thank you so much again, Brett, for bringing your expertise to this conversation. How you doing today?
Yeah, Charlene, I'm doing great. And I can probably promise one of those deeps, but I'm not sure I can give you deep expertise. But
Oh, you don't give yourself enough credit, Brett.
and I'm the one who's humbled to join you today and talk about all of the things that are happening within the higher ed landscape and more broadly within the marketing communications and even brand space that has impacts across industries and across geographies. Because I think we're at a super interesting space, both in terms of technology, consumer sentiment, societal impact. It's a wonderful time to be a communicator. It's a challenging time to be a communicator, and I
Yep.
can't wait to dig into those topics with you.
Oh, good. I'm so happy to have you. Okay, well, I did speak a little bit about your background, but the first question I always like to ask really is just around your role. So I know you've come into higher ed from this kind of long corporate background, and I'm just thinking about how that has shaped the way you approach your role right now at Lehigh and what's felt, I don't know, the most different or the most challenging about this sector.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I joined Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, just 3 years ago, coming out of a 25-year career in industry. I was in
Right.
healthcare, I was in insurance. I had a stint, as most of us do, as a newspaper reporter. And so 3 years ago, the headwinds were very different in higher
Right.
ed than they are today, of course, especially for U.S.-based institutions. But here's what I think. I think that coming in with a perspective from industry and from for-profit, publicly traded companies has been very helpful. So number one, I come in not as a member of the academy who has a depth and a history within higher ed, but
Right.
someone who comes in as an outsider, right? And that brings both fresh perspectives and also an innate curiosity to be able to say, hey, I don't understand this. Help me understand. And if you approach a new role in a new industry with equal parts confidence and curiosity and humility, which I always try to do with a new role, but especially in a new industry, you'll learn a lot. You get a chance to see, oh, here's how the expertise I can bring can be applied, and also here are the macro and micro trends that I wasn't aware of, and how
Right.
we can figure them out and harness them. And so what I think is curiosity is key, especially in higher ed, especially right now. Being willing to ask questions, being willing to understand what are the dynamics, how do they operate, what are the external factors that are driving policy and procedure, what are the internal dynamics within our university, how do they work in concert or at times in conflict with one another,
Mm-hmm.
and where can we really step in as communication leaders, marketing leaders, brand leaders, and help guide us towards a path that drives student outcomes, that drives faculty research outcomes, and ultimately societal value.
And as usual, you said something that brought up other questions that were not originally planned to ask. But I mean, my big question is always going to be, you talked about driving your institution forward just there. How them? I want to think just a little bit about your role specifically and how you think your role kind of shapes where your institution is going.
Yeah, so at Lehigh, I joined at a real inflection point and a lovely
Right.
time to join a university. Lehigh's a mid-size residential research university, very strong and well known in the market we are in, but not as well known with lower awareness nationally.
Right.
And so I joined just as we were embarking on a new strategic planning process.
Okay.
And I think that timing was perfect because having a senior communications leader involved in the gathering of data, the evaluation of that data, and the actual crafting of a long-term 10-year strategic plan was perfect timing. And I say I was involved, but it was really the team that I lead, very intimately involved in crafting our plan for the future called Inspiring the Future Makers. And we
Right.
use the term future makers to think about both in terms of uh, individuals who are coming to Lehigh, who are looking to make things, right? Make
Right.
research, make contributions, make societal impact, but also changing and shaping the future into ways that we can't even imagine. And so I
Right.
think that that strategy at this moment in time is just so, it was so prescient that we landed on that 3 years ago. So so this role, I think, for us as communicators, as marketers, as strategic brand advisors, is vital in terms of delivering on a strategic plan that has such bold and aggressive goals in it. And our
Right.
plan is three main goals, 10 big initiatives. We, as the communications function, are actually leading one of those 10 initiatives, focused on community engagement and involvement in two-way, multi-way, vital connection, which is amazing. And so I think that we have impact in a variety of ways. I'll tell you what I think is most important for us as communicators, and I've felt this way since I first started back in corporate in the late '90s, which dates me, but that's fine. If we don't understand the business that we're in and the solid business fundamentals, then we will be hard pressed to deliver the greatest value towards ultimately
Absolutely.
moving forth outcomes. So the first thing I did after showing up and figuring out what does a provost do, how do the deans function and connect in, what does the cabinet look like, what does my role in the cabinet look like relative to other members of the cabinet, was I really sat down with the controller and with the vice president of finance to understand what are the drivers of this business,
Of
right?
course.
And it's very different than in corporate. In corporate, the drivers are very clear on a balance sheet. You
Yeah.
go through P&L, you understand your customer base. In higher ed, we have constituents that could be 15-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
For exactly 1 year. So that is both a migratory and a very unique, right, generational bunch. And
Right.
then their parents, and then alumni who are on the typically the other end of the spectrum, and
Right.
then policymakers, and then tenured faculty, and staff members who are truly passionate and dedicated about what they do, faculty dedicated to the furthering of research and to helping students grow and understand the world around them. The audiences are so broad and diverse,
Broad.
and the revenue streams are quite diverse as well that drive financial success for an institution.
Right.
So I think as communicators, when we learn and understand how our strategies, how our tactical implementation can help move forward with both the university's goals and mission, but
Right.
also help drive from a revenue standpoint our ultimate ability to be able to meet our revenue targets, short term and long term. That's where the magic sauce is.
I think you touched on a lot of things there. I mean, the biggest thing that and I have this conversation too, is the amount of stakeholders, the amount of people you're trying to reach, how you're trying to reach them, and what you're trying to say to them is so very different at any given time. But still trying to drive your institution forward to this one goal. So it's almost like an interesting balancing act. And I want to pick up a little bit on what you said earlier, this idea about the time we're in and the challenge around the time we're in. So you did talk a little bit about that in a previous conversation we had, but this idea once again about the kind of the erosion of trust in the sector and this struggle to communicate the value of post-secondary education. How do you think we kind of reclaim that narrative, and who needs to be at the table to do it?
Yeah, it is. I think the question, one of the big questions for the age we're in, right, Sharlyn? So who would have thought that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, who would have thought that the role of higher ed in American society would be one of the top, maybe two political themes that
Yeah.
presidential candidates would run on? And yet that's what we
So re-
experienced last November in the US. And that has global ramifications, of course, right? Um, and, and so knowing that the value that a university provides is really under, pardon upon, a microscope right now,
Right.
it creates both a challenge and I think a huge opportunity for those of us in higher ed, and really for others in the ecosystem that are not
Right.
directly in higher ed, but organizations and institutions that benefit directly and indirectly from the outputs of the higher education landscape. And so here's what I mean by that. When I think about the value that we provide as universities, we provide a number of different societal values.
Hmm.
Number one, there's value in student outcomes, right? Students are willing to invest money to earn a degree. There has to be, there's more than a handshake agreement there. There has to be a delivery of something tangible when you complete that degree, right? And it isn't just economic, although the economics are really important. But what is it that you're preparing yourself to do? What connections are you making? What knowledge are you building that you wouldn't otherwise be able to gather to create a more competitive you to do whatever it is that you find meaning and also economic value in once you graduate? And I think for me, student outcomes is a huge value that continues to get lost in much of the public dialogue. That's one thing. The impact of research is another thing. What we hear, I think, again and again, is a conversation around university driven research that focuses too much on the cost and not nearly enough on the impact that university driven research has, right?
On society.
On society, exactly.
Yeah.
The impact to global society cannot be understated, right? Without university driven research, we wouldn't have um, uh, obvious and clear solutions for healthcare needs, for infrastructure based needs, right? We wouldn't be driving on safe roads. We wouldn't be crossing rivers over safe bridges. We wouldn't be living in safe homes. We wouldn't be able to take on the disease states that are thankfully, knock on wood, a thing of the past. That's all driven by private, public, university partnership research programs.
Right.
And when we put that at risk and when we question it from a purely financial standpoint, I think we really put ourselves at risk as a society for bending that really, really terrific trajectory that the impact of research has. And then I would say a third thing is the experience and the lessons that you learn in your journey throughout your college career serves as an incubator for the rest of your life. And oftentimes that message gets a little bit perverted in
Right.
public dialogue and discourse.
Right.
And yet I think that there's a real tangible benefit and value there. So in my mind, those are the three real huge benefits. There are many benefits to the value proposition of higher ed, but I would categorize them like that. And Charlotte, I'm interested, you talk to a lot of people in this industry. What do you think? How do you see the value of higher ed in society?
Oh, well, no one's ever asked me. It's usually me asking the questions. I mean, I'm a person who, let's say, it was raised in a household to just have the basic understanding that seeking knowledge and getting knowledge is critical. It is, it's valuable for your own critical thinking to know how to operate in life, to know how to respond to problems that you're faced with. Number one, just on a very basic level. On a bigger level, to me, higher education contributes to exactly what you said. It contributes to society, everyday human being, everyday things, the way we operate with computers, the way we operate with people, the way we operate grocery stores. All of these things get down into how did you get that skill? How did you develop that new technology? Where did you get that from? You got it from likely you went to school and you got training on it, right? So that's the very basic level. The higher level of that is is creating an environment or an economy, and I mean nationally, of course, and I mean regionally, depending on where you are, but then the bigger picture, right? This idea that we have these global economies that are able to work with each other, that are able to identify, where they have strengths, where they have weaknesses, and be able to trade goods. Literally, I actually truly believe that once again, I'm not the person being interviewed, but I do believe that there's a huge importance on this idea of seeking knowledge um, and being skilled enough to take on and to tackle some of those bigger problems that we face in society through education that you get at higher ed institutions, because otherwise there is no avenue to do that, right? There is no avenue to actually chase down those solutions to those problems. And the problems are shifting and the problems are changing every single day. And to me, that is the biggest value of higher ed, is that in these kind of environments, we question that and we explore and we discover. And that to me is the bigger role of higher ed, is doing that exploration work and finding out what is our path forward to finding those solutions that benefit the most amount of people, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I love that. And if I could build off of that,
Build.
because the second part of your question is how do we reclaim the public narrative, right?
Right.
Because one thing to understand what the value is, but right now the sentiment, I think, is not that. And so what you just shared, and especially that economic piece that you shared, Charlotte, I don't believe that higher ed leadership and higher ed trade associations are well positioned or should be the only voices to really counter the prevailing argument in the public spectrum, right? I think they're a critical and vital voice. I think we need to hear from presidents and provosts and leaders within the university ecosystem. I think we need to hear from students. I think
Right.
we need to hear from faculty about the value of the university system. However, I think the very powerful story is talking and hearing from hiring managers, from business
Right.
owners, from CEOs who would say, hey, without a university that,
Yeah.
that creates and mints electrical engineers and health economics, brilliant scientists, I wouldn't be able to compete in the global marketplace. My
Exactly.
company wouldn't be able to compete without the knowledge and the super smart, super bright, super curious, interdisciplinary trained individuals coming out of the higher ed system. I wouldn't be able to run my business. I wouldn't be able to hire competitive staff. I wouldn't be able to run a government. I wouldn't be able to manage
Right.
my municipal systems. And I think
Exactly.
that's the story that we really need to do. So I think we need to find that public private partnership for sharing stories and demonstrating the value that goes far beyond just hearing from the university system themselves or from trade associations representing universities.
I agree with you significantly, and to me, it ties back to that main piece that you mentioned. Just even in the very beginning, all of the different stakeholder groups that you're managing or you're working directly with, the industry partners being a huge stakeholder and a huge audience and a huge prospective partner in all of that, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I want to think a little bit like still talking of pulling on this string of what's going on in our today's climate with, political pressure, with global competition, with digital disruption. What are the most pressing risks institutions like yours are trying to manage, and how does that actually shape your direct communications and marketing strategies?
Yeah. So I think about every challenge as an opportunity, and so we're in an opportunity rich environment.
Yeah.
There are plenty of challenges. In the U.S., we have a political system that is a bit challenging for higher ed. And that we can't have a conversation like this without acknowledging that elephant in the room.
Right.
That we've got an executive branch who has put higher ed
On the chopping
directly
block.
into the
Line of
into the
fire.
sites. Yep. And here's what I think. I think that a lot of what we hear and a lot of what we see is driven by a narrative that is false.
Right.
And so it is incumbent on us as members of higher ed leadership to help counter that, and
Right.
to do that through our own very substantive work and relationship building with elected officials. So I'll talk very specifically about Lehigh and politics for a moment. We believe strongly, and our president has been very outspoken on this topic,
Mm-hmm.
that the strongest efforts we can make are to continue to build really good working relationships with the elected officials from the districts that represent where we're located. And so
Right.
for us, we're in Pennsylvania. We have two very thoughtful senators and a U.S. congressman who we've maintained very strong relationships with the representatives themselves, the senators themselves, and members of their staff. And they've been very receptive to having conversations and to exploring the topics related to policy, related to legislation, related to budget reconciliation. Now, we're not always going to agree, and that's to be expected. That's always been the case, right? In the political arena. But having open, productive conversations, I think, is the way that we can really influence and drive some positive impact. I think the war of words is never going to be won in the current political environment. I don't think we'll ever be able to legislate by op-ed in a way that's going to be as productive as
Right.
we would. And I'm not saying that there isn't a role for thoughtful opinion pieces and contributed articles sharing perspectives, but I do believe that doing the work and building those relationships and continuing those relationships at the elected official level, at the government agency level, will benefit us far greater over time. And I think that that's a way for us to approach the current political environment. Now, that's one challenge. You mentioned technology. Another thing we need to talk about is artificial intelligence, right?
Right.
Generative AI. We can't have a conversation around higher ed or society or communications or marketing
Without.
without talking
Yeah.
AI.
Yep.
And it's a topic that I'm very passionate about and that we are very passionate about at Lehigh. We took the perspective early on to see and view artificial intelligence as a very strategic tool and a differentiator. And I'm very glad and I feel fortunate that we've done that. So we see AI as a learning opportunity and as a tool in a system that students, faculty, and staff alike really need to understand how we can best benefit
Right.
from the tool, and also understand, like maybe no other technology since the advent of the personal computer, right, or
Right.
email, the ethics and the morality that underpin this particular technology. And so we're taking that on. Lehigh has formed an AI council, an
Okay.
advisory council that spans both faculty and staff expertise to evaluate how do we utilize artificial intelligence tools and technology in the classroom, outside the classroom, to help benefit the way that we provide access to education and research, and also where and how do we put the guardrails in place
You're
so
right.
that we're being thoughtful about its use in an educational environment. From a communication standpoint, we view this as a tool and opportunity as well. And so, number one, we use in our the way I have the team structured is we have a very thoughtful content strategy as part of our university communication structure, both in terms of content creation and content distribution. Because I
Right.
see that as a seesaw. If we create the best content in the world, but we have a garbage system to deliver,
How are they
we've
going to
just
get it?
we've just over optimized great content.
Right.
And if we have a really amazing system but terrible content, we're just very, very efficient at pumping out garbage.
Right.
So we found that balance of doing both very well. On the system side, we do that through very thoughtful external partnerships with organizations that utilize and harness the underlying technology behind AI to help our systems be smarter. So
Right.
over time, when we're communicating out and we're sharing to audiences the content that we've created, our system is a learning system that will know that Sharlyn doesn't open her email at 9 a.m., So
Yeah.
it's kind of foolish to be sending you
Email before 9 a.m.
we know you're not going to be opening, but we do know that you'll be checking your text messages around the lunch hour. And we
Right.
do know, on an anonymized basis, that you check our website just after work hours. And so as the system learns, we can then customize within given constraints. Like we could say within a 24-hour period, we'd
Right.
like to communicate this message in an optimal way to all of the intended recipients. And the system can learn and communicate out in a way that will maximize the effectiveness of the delivery. So that's just one very specific example of how we're looking at AI as part of the communications tech stack, which I think is where, and I believe strongly, that's where our opportunity is monumental as communicators, right? What the tech stack looks like today relative to 5 years ago, it's apples and oranges.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And what it'll look like in 3 years, I'm
No
so
idea.
excited to envision what that might look like, because I believe that we need to be looking around corners on behalf of our institutions
Of
to
course.
understand the world of possibility so that we can be prepared to harness the new and upcoming technologies when it's still in its very nascent stages.
I think so. I have another question to ask you, but I'm going to put that aside for 1 second because I want to pull on this string again about this idea of how you're really using AI to measure. So for me, I'm thinking about how are you measuring the impact of your work, and especially knowing that we have this wonderful new tech stack of all these different things that we can do and all these different things that we can look at and how they can translate directly into our strategy. So, how are you measuring some of the impact of your work in such a complex and charged environment? And what metrics are most important to you and your leadership team right now?
Yeah, so I love that question because I'm a huge believer that what gets measured gets done, and have
Right.
been a believer in that for a long time. So I'll talk first about AI enabled metrics, but then I'll talk more broadly about our thoughtful approach to what and how we measure and why.
Right.
So I believe that today, an AI based system or an AI enabled system can help us maybe more directly with activity versus outcome metrics.
Right.
And that is changing and will change. And there is a place to have activity based metrics, right? And AI does a very, very good job with that because it can automate in a way that would take a human a long time to do. AI will do it very quickly, and it's learning and getting much, much more accurate in the data that it can crunch for us. So, for example, we use the system I was mentioning for content distribution. We're able to generate and run reports to determine what types of content is hitting the mark in terms of
Right.
engagement and awareness, and what content isn't, and even to a certain degree, why. What content's being shared, what content's being engaged with, and AI systems can help us with that. I
Right.
would put that very much to a certain degree, in the activity-based set of metrics. And I think those are important for us to be able to learn and grow and continue to improve upon our systems. Where the magic happens, I think, is finding
Outcomes.
where our outcomes tied to the business of
Right.
the university. And so we go after outcomes data in a variety of different ways. I'll give you one example. So oftentimes what we'll do is we'll put specific survey questions embedded into events, activities, and programs that we've implemented to really try to determine how we're doing. And
Right.
then we can then build off of those, and that gives us great key insights we can derive. I'll give you actually a couple of quick examples.
Yeah, I love the
Um,
examples.
yeah, so the first is we run a program on behalf of the university called Compelling Perspectives, and it's been for the last 2 years. We're now in year three. It's a signature dialogue program on campus where we identify a topic of societal significance each academic year, and we invite speakers who will be representing diverse perspectives on the same topic
Mhm.
to campus. And then our president, Joe Helbley, will engage in a moderated discussion that then ends with an open Q&A to explore the topic. So
Right.
in year one, our topic was focused on national security and global environment. In this past year, the topic was on traditional versus new media and the role of traditional media in contemporary society. And we invited well-known speakers. We invited Theresa May and Leon Panetta in year one. We had a three-fer in year two. We invited Katie Couric, Marty
Wow.
Barron, and V. Spear, who's a TikTok, a very well-known TikTok journalist,
Right.
to speak on the topic. And among other things that we measured a net promoter score of the attendees. So we asked the question, would you recommend this to friends and family? The same question you would ask for more traditional marketing
Of
NPS.
course.
And then we generate and ran the NPS numbers for each of those events. That gives us a really good, clear outcome of how well we're doing with this program.
Right.
And we've seen improvement on the NPS. Actually, we see incredible results in the NPS for this program over time. So that's a great way to measure an outcome of an event like that. Another thing that we've done is through one of our major strategic plan initiatives focused on how we engage with our local communities. We are now in year two of an annual community sentiment survey that we run out of my office, where we decided, look, we hear all kinds of anecdotal feedback from community members, right? Community members directly in South Bethlehem, where our university is located, community members across the city of Bethlehem, across the entire Lehigh Valley. Anecdotally, it's helpful, but we wanted quantitative data. And so we've put out a perception survey and gathered very specific data on community perceptions of Lehigh, the role of Lehigh in the community, our impact in the community, the impact of faculty, students, and staff in the community, perceptions of Lehigh. We did a net promoter score question. We did a question focused on trust, so that we could be very open and honest with ourselves and say, this is what the data tells us. And then we can cut that data by demographics, understand what it's telling us. And now over time, we've committed to doing this annually. We'll be able to understand some of the drivers that move those numbers or don't move those numbers, so that we can make decisions differently in terms of how we operate. So that's how we move into the outcomes-based mentality of how we measure.
Right. And building that bigger story. I wonder, what was your response like? Like, what was your response? And you don't have to tell me the exact number, but what was your response rate like? Pretty
So
significant?
it was great. We got significance. We had,
That's good.
let's see, it was phone and text to web based surveying.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we get 700 to 800 total responses in the community each year in the survey.
Oh, that's great.
The responses are great. I mean, it gives us really good feedback, right? We saw our trust and our net promoter score improve from year one to year two. We know that we did a lot of things differently to drive that improvement.
Right.
And yet we also see embedded within the numbers areas of continued opportunity for us to make changes and improvements. And there was very specific questions around the number of community members who come on campus, who have experiences with campus or not in a given year. And then we can run the numbers by those who have experienced campus and those who haven't. And those reputational drivers can vary quite a bit. And so that tells us the more we can engage our local community in activities, right? Theater performances, athletic events, cultural events, experiences at our art museum, the better and more impactful their experiences and beliefs and reputational drivers will be with Lehigh. So that's the kind of depth that we can get to when we look at the data.
Yeah, and being able to tell that bigger story. We always find that's the biggest issue with communications, right? Everyone's, oh, we've done this output, but really being able to tie it back, to draw a straight line to the outcome of something that you've done and what that means in a bigger perspective is huge.
Yeah.
Is huge. I want to touch quickly on some of the partnerships and the influence around that. So you mentioned a little bit about this need, we talked about that, about this need for industry partners to really advocate alongside us, beside us. How are you thinking about partnerships with corporations, with thought leaders, with policymakers, to amplify the university's roles in solving these global challenges?
Yeah. So I think about this a lot, and we think about this as a university leadership team a lot, because we can't be as successful alone as we'd ever be in coalitions and partnerships. And I want to give two examples. One is an example that starts locally on a topic that has broad global impact. And then the second is a topic that is inherently a global topic, and how Lehigh is taking it on in partnership with the federal government and with many industry partners. So the first thing I'm talking about is access to affordable housing. And so access
Right.
to affordable housing is a huge, huge issue, both globally and in the Lehigh Valley where we're located. And so
Right.
Lehigh has a research office within our institution called the Small Cities Lab. And this group is responsible for thinking about hyper local issues that small to mid-size municipals communities face, and brainstorming and collaboratively coming up with solutions. And as a result of that work, we created a body of work with the city of Bethlehem to try and take on one aspect of a affordable housing issue in the city of Bethlehem. And that is,
Hmm.
how can we help create alternative living arrangements that would be lower cost living arrangements? And that's spun up into a program called the Alley House program. And so this is a concept of creating incremental living spaces that can be attached to existing structures and homes. And through the
Wow.
Small Cities Lab at Lehigh, we partnered with the city of Bethlehem, the mayor's office, and worked very collaboratively with them, as well as local builders, to identify how can we make this happen? Can we make it happen? We looked at other case studies in other cities across the country where we've seen positive results from a program like this. And
Right.
then ultimately, the coalition that formed reached out to our elected officials at both the congressional and the Senate level, and received federal funding to move forward with this as a pilot program. A lot of work went into figuring out, well, what do we do about zoning? What do we do
Right.
about building materials? What do we do about creating templates? How do we design it? Our own architecture students were hands-on building design templates for different types of structures. And ultimately, we now have alley houses being built in the city of Bethlehem through this
Right.
innovative program. And it's all being studied and researched so that the learnings can be shared
Well
across the
shared.
country, and ultimately even broader than that, to help use this. It's one component of a much larger citywide strategy that the mayor's office is running to approach affordable housing. But it's a great example of public-private partnership coming together to solve something. So that's one example. Um, the next
And it's
is
another great example of how it's very difficult to see how important or how relevant, post-secondary institutions are and what it means to be a part of higher ed and how higher ed is driving all of these other, impact indicators forward. Anyway, you go ahead.
absolutely, and it's so great that you say that, Sharlyn, because we think about this, and I talk about it nonstop, and yet to see it in action is
Just in
masterful,
action.
because at the end of the day, people will have a perspective of what students in private universities are doing. And yet you can break all those stereotypes just by coming to our campus. And we have the old Bethlehem Steel research facilities are part of our campus.
Wow.
And we have these huge big bays where you can do loud, big, messy stuff. And we have architecture students, and we have humanities students thinking about the social and psychological implications, and we have a wood shop and a metal shop, and we have community home builders, and members of the zoning commission, and members of the city infrastructure, all coming in together, and they're building things, and you've got 2x4s, and you've got saws going, and you're figuring it out,
Right.
and ultimately coming up with the solution. And it's all happening right there on campus. And you're right, it's the perfect example of how a community can come together, and how a university can help convene those
To anchor
efforts
that. Right.
to make that happen. Yeah. And I can give just one other quick topic
Give
that's
it.
far more broad. um, uh, Weather. That's the topic, Charlene. Weather. Weather patterns and catastrophic weather events are very much a reality globally.
Right now, in particular.
And right now in particular, and we see a lot of need for evaluating the models that government agencies, private organizations, nonprofit organizations use to evaluate and even predict
Right.
when significant weather events happen so that you can plan better for them. Um, we decided as part of our strategic plan that we wanted to stand up a couple of university-wide research centers. The first such research center is our Catastrophe Modeling and Resilience Center. This is a center that is housing brilliant faculty minds, brilliant student minds. We actually have a master's program in catastrophe modeling within this research center to evaluate and help better create models that can predict the impact of major storms and weather events.
Right.
And this is a group that's now just beginning year two, working collaboratively with the U.S. government, with 20 to 30 public and private companies that have come together alongside other major research institutions to say, this is a real topic that needs deeper exploration. How can we work together? How can for-profit companies, nonprofit research institutions, and the federal government come together, pool
Right.
resources, and figure this out in a way that's going to ultimately benefit um, American citizens and global citizens? And it's a really, really exciting program. It's an exciting research, uh, kind of a world lab that's headquartered right in our Bethlehem campus, but takes on and looks at, earthquakes that may impact countries in Central Asia, or wind and water events that could impact any country across the globe. So these are just a couple of examples where public-private partnerships are coming together, anchored by a research institution to take on some of the most compelling societal challenges.
Challenges. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes back to my earlier point. It's difficult not to see the value in what higher education does and what these institutions do for society at large. My very last question. I know I've taken up so much of your time, Brett, but my very last question is a question I ask every single person, and the question really is about thinking about your goals over the next 6 months. If I were to give you a magic wand right now, and you could wave it, and you can use that magic and magically fixed one major challenge in the way, your university specifically communicates their purpose and manages their brand, no politics, no budget barriers, what would you fix?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's such a big question,
I
right?
know.
Because there are external drivers, there are internal drivers. Here's my thought on that. And remember, I come out of a corporate background where I've lived in and worked in both decentralized and centralized environments where silos can and have been created inadvertently that slow down the process of innovation and discovery, right? And this is not a message just about my institution, but it's a message, I think, about um, institutions in general. If
Right.
I had a magic wand, I would say I would want to tear down the bureaucratic silo building that inhibits good, smart, talented people from doing the work and working together. And that is something that I would have wanted to have done from my early 20s, working at State Farm Insurance in California, to today. And I've seen it done better or worse at different organizations. Some companies try it, some companies don't try it. Some companies try to change culture through policy, which never works.
Of
So if
course.
I had my magic wand, I would say let's just start from scratch and get rid of the silo building, because most of it happens inadvertently, and then it's very difficult to get at the actual goodness of people working together and
Right.
figuring things out, regardless of what your role is, regardless of what your level is, regardless of what part of the organization you're sitting in, regardless of
Right.
where your budget's coming from or who's, approving your expense reports. That's what I would do. What
That's a
would you do?
great, that's
What
a
would
great,
you do?
oh my goodness. I don't know. That's a very big question. You're right. That's a very, very big question. What would I do? I mean, the silo piece is a good piece of it. I think I don't know. It would have to be something about some of the, I mean, it's kind of silo related too, but it's more so about some of the roadblocks to, thinking quickly and being authentic on your feet. I feel like specifically when you're thinking about specific audiences at universities and colleges, for example, are trying to communicate with a big challenge that I see is to your point, some of the bureaucracy, right? Like you have to go through 18 different jump points before you get to one specific idea and one strategy, and then it takes you another 10 years to execute that thing. When really some of these things, someone needs to make a decision. You need to make a decision quickly. You need to be able to act on it quickly. You need to be able to follow it up in a specific way. You need to be able to set the right benchmarks so that you can see how well you did, if it's working, if it's effective, if it's not, how you change. Anyway, it probably if I need to think about it some more, but probably it would be something around that is as a
Love
huge
it.
challenge. But I would like to say that you were not the only person who said that. This idea about, breaking down those silos and really the idea about addressing organizational structures. And a lot of people I've spoken to recently have said, we're going through a reorg because we don't know how to manage this and this and this, and we need to reorganize ourselves in order to manage this and this and this and this and this. So you're in good company, friend.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, a reorg never solves this problem.
Never, never,
Never solves this problem. And if
never.
I got a bonus magic wand, if you're giving me two magic
I'm
wands,
giving you two.
I'd want to pop all of our algorithmic social media bubbles and get us talking to each other and out of the realm of immediately being at odds with everybody who doesn't follow the exact worldview that we've created for ourselves, driven by our iPhones and our, um, um, laptops and our mobile devices. That's what I would do with my second magic wand. I would say, let's actually engage with each other and not engage with content that is specifically directed at encouraging you to accept your strict worldview that you've created for yourself to the extreme avoidance of any and all other perspectives. That would be
Or
my
in,
second.
encourage division, right? Just this
Yeah.
idea that we're encouraging this divisive mentality all the time. I agree with you completely. And I've had a similar conversation, but this idea that, especially with this new, I want to say this new generation, but our generations included, this idea that we're becoming that much more savvy to some of the things in front of us, and this idea that we are turning off. And therefore, it is I think we place more value on having one-to-one conversations and meeting people where they're at, but it does become more difficult in a world where, we're using AI as a tool and people are trying to figure out what's real and what's not and where they should trust and where they shouldn't trust. So I feel like we could go on for days about that one, Brett.
I know. That's why I saved it for the end because
Yeah, you're smart.
if we started there, we wouldn't have ended anywhere
We
except.
would we would still be talking on for the next 10 years, but I think it's a valid discussion and it's very, very interesting. I have to say
Agreed.
thank you, thank you, thank you so much for sharing your time and your experience and your perspective with us today. Is there anything else that comes to mind before I let you go? Anything else that you're like, I have to say this, Sharlyn?
I mean, there's a million things, but just one thing I would say is, and this is going to be a shameless plug, the,
Shameless plug. Do it.
the Institute for Public Relations is an extraordinary group that puts out research on many of the topics that we just talked about. But their groundbreaking research on disinformation
Right.
is something that ties directly to this last topic we just talked about. And if we were to point people to one place to say, how can we think about this differently? I would suggest taking a look at the incredible data and insights that come out of the Institute for Public Relations study on disinformation. It's a great place to go. I'm also the vice chair of the board, so I'm very much incented to be in favor of our research. But it's tremendous research, and it's really helpful to understand some of the drivers there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because anything that's useful like that, I will always grab and I will share it as long as it's available to be shared. So definitely follow up on that piece because it may be nice to include here. Um, it's been So wonderful. Such a thoughtful, generous conversation. To anybody who watches, who listens to this, I hope the episode sparked ideas, affirmed your own experiences, helped you see a challenge in a new light. It definitely has affirmed a lot of things in my brain today. If you're a communications or marketing leader in higher ed and you want to contribute to this evolving conversation, I'd love to hear from you, because I think at least these conversations aren't just talk. They really are ideally the start of, a roadmap for the future of our field. So let's get to work. Thank you so much again, Brett.
Thank you. Appreciate it.